Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 159 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we're going to build a farm that will grow crystal dust. Enjoy! Another thing to consider is that we are going to need more modules for this. Not too many modules. Well, I say that. You see this one setup, 260 of the productivity modules. I mean, that's not a ton, considering we have the limit set to 1,000, but still. We have 0 right now. So we need more crystals. And I think I determined that there's a problem here with crystal dust because the train still isn't full and it's been stuck at this 40 out of 60 stacks in a long time. And I kind of noticed here that, hey, we have geodes. They're just not being consumed because of a problem with the numbers here. And I could fix that. But if we do that, it'll probably fill up the train and then crystal production will continue, and I kind of don't want to do that because we have been generating lots of seeds. And how are we doing here? Pretty good. Now we have 4 out of 4 for 2 of the types that are still running, so that's quite good. And it looks like all of these have actually hit their stopper, so that's actually really interesting, to where finally they've all gotten to 80, and it has to be below 80 for any generation to happen at all. So now that it's at that point, it's stabilized. But we have a choice of the rarer types of seeds to use. So we have something to consider here. So if we upgrade these farms, we will double their speed. But we also have productivity modules as well, which will add 30% on top of that. So if we upgrade these farms, we can get 260% increased production out of the same footprint. And why is that important? Well, right now, what this farm is doing is producing nutrient pulp for the fish. But if we look at all of these new types of resources we have access to now, the lower tiers basically give you corn, cellulose fiber, leaves fiber. They're basically all these combinations of different resources. But the higher tier is when things start getting interesting. For example, with Kendalion here, we can get corn, cellulose fiber, and crystal dust. Or we can get alien bacteria, or leaves and crystal dust, pips or crystal dust, or nuts, corn, and crystal dust. So the thing that we're short on here is the crystal dust. So if we can improve the efficiency of these nutrient pulp farms to provide the nutrient pulp, but also have additional time left over in order to be less efficient with the pulp, but also produce the dust, then we will lower the dust requirement to actually make crystals. And after going through here, I realized that I had an oversight where this was the complete setup and these are the numbers. Well, we also need to make crystal slurry in order to polish these splinters, and that's already set up and we're doing it, but it's not been calculated in Hellmod. So Hellmod is telling us we need 15 crystal dust. Well, what happens if we make all the slurry we need from crystal dust, which is what we're doing now? Well, that adds another 18 dust, which means we need 33 crystal dust a second in order for this thing to run continuously. So that's a lot more dust, and in fact that's more than a red belt, so even the belt system isn't enough. But that's okay, because now we have a number to work with when we're planning this. And when we look at all of these types of things that we can process, they all process in units of 20, and then the results you get varies between them, and it's kind of cool how each one is its own combination of resources. Now, most of the ones that produce crystal dust will give you 4 crystal dust, and a lot of times it's something else, but if we go to Nexaflax here, it's 6 crystal dust and 24 leaves. So that is the one that will produce the most crystal dust and the least amount of nutrient pulp. And I say that because our machines are going to be so much faster, like 260% faster, that we have a lot of time left over to be less efficient about the pulp and more efficient about the dust. So how do we grow Nexaflax? Well, it's a light mud water thing, so it's a swamp food that is mud, fertilizer, and the seeds and light mud water. And what we're making right now, zombie something, I forget what it is, but this is also a swamp thing that requires mud, and it's not the same water, but also swamp water, basically. So that would be easy enough to implement that really the only extra thing we'd have to put in there is fertilizer, and we are making fertilizer in this on the drone network now. So it would be pretty easy to upgrade this setup. Now the question that remains is, do we have Nexaflax seeds? Because we kind of need them to do that. And we check here, and I believe that we do. It's kind of hard to tell, but if you look at the seed that's like right here where the cursor is, it's the second from the left on the bottom there. It's the 15. That sure looks like the Nexaflax seed, and it is. So now the question is how much crystal dust can we make with this footprint while still providing enough nutrient pulp for this to run? Well, let's do some selecting here. Let's just select the entire farm. It's going to take a second because that's a lot to calculate. But we need 191 nutrient pulp. So that's the number we're working with. 13 farms, but that's really 14 when you consider that extra square. But we have approximately 14 farms that we can put in here. And we need 191 nutrient pulp. So let's calculate here. We need nutrient pulp from leaves. So we come down here and we can make it from all these different sources. It's kind of funny to look at. Like, I think we're doing beans now because it's 5 beans gives you 80 nutrient pulp. And the same amount of corn gives you 70. 40 for nuts, 20 for pips, 60 for fruits. Well, with leaves, we get 10. So almost nothing. So it's very inefficient for making pulp, but great for making dust. Now the question is, do we have enough farms for this to work? We'll grab that. We need 191. So there's a number. We can worry about modules in a bit. Right now we're just kind of theory crafting here. So we need these leaves from Nexaflax. And that will create these numbers here. So we do Nexaflax, which we make in these swamps. And we need 26 of them. And it has to be made in a swamp environment farm. But we can put the agricultural modules in there to help out a bit. And it gets us down to 20. So that will make the setup bigger. Not that much bigger, though. It probably will fit without bumping into the trains here, although it might be kind of tight. But otherwise that could work. Do we want to consider any other crystal dust types? Probably not, because this is the most efficient way of making the dust and the least efficient way of making the pulp. So when you consider that you have 100% production and a certain percent of it goes to making the pulp and a certain amount goes to making the dust, and this relationship changes depending on which thing you're growing. And you know how much dust you get, or what percent of it is dust and what percent of it is pulp. Well, on the Nexaflax here, it's as close to dust priority as you can get. And you can see we're 23 or about 24 dust. And that's actually not enough, technically. That even with all of that, it's still not enough. But if we didn't need 33 and we could take 24 dust out of that requirement, that would be huge and make the crystals go way longer than they are right now. So it seems like a really good idea to do this, even if we have to move some of the machines around. Okay, well, since this is a good idea, let's go in here and make it smaller by throwing in some speed modules. And same for the bioprocessors. And I can see that because of these numbers, we're going to have to be very considerate with the amount of belts that go into this. So it's interesting to look at the ingredient is 2.66 red belts, and it's only going into like 8 machines. So when the numbers get like this, you have to be really careful about the logistics of how do all these machines receive resources, and are your inserters fast enough? But luckily stack inserters are pretty fast. So out of all these machines, it would only need 1 stack inserter as an input. It's just several red belts, because those red belts are getting pretty old now, and we still don't have access to the next tier yet, so we're going to have to keep kind of dealing with them. So that's something to consider, that you don't want your machines being so fast that the logistics system can't even keep up with it, because then at that point it's too compact, and it needs the space to breathe. Okay. Well, we have an input of Nexaflax seeds. Let's see if it will link to the input or to the output. So we do input of Nexaflax. And it has the dormant. Let's do them separately. Let's come out here and take all of those Nexaflax seeds and turn them into regular seeds. Now what's interesting is that when you're turning dormant seeds into regular seeds, it actually produces some seeds. So you get 5 seeds out and 5% of getting another seed. So they multiply their seed setup, which means anything that we do is actually going to produce more seeds than we need. That's okay for now. But we need less than 1 machine. Since that's the case, let's just make it more efficient. Let's see here. It's linking to the requirement, but instead, let's link it to the input of all the dormant seeds. So we want to take all the dormant seeds, turn them into regular seeds. So then we have a very small number of regular seeds as an output. Is it hidden player crafting? Yes. The compost ratio is the same, but they're just extra seeds we won't need, so you might as well turn it into compost, which is being used elsewhere. We'll probably need to set up a repository and the necessary very long wire in order for this to work, but we can set it to the input to get rid of that. And this composter, it's barely running at all, so it's almost not even worth using modules, but hey, whatever. Make it more efficient. So we've gotten rid of all of the weird outputs. Now what about inputs? Well, it requires mud, which we can reduce that requirement a little bit because we're going to need to make mud water. And don't forget that this fishing setup needs all of this to provide the saline water, which means it's already going to have access to about 10 mud a second just in normal operation. So it's really only going to need about 3.5 mud from the rest of the factory in order to run properly. But we need to make some light mud water, and it's linking to mud, not to mud water. Maybe it just links to the first thing on the list. So we unhook it, set mud to 0, and now it's linking to mud water. Let's get each tier in here. And it can probably share a pump with everything else, because it's not very much. But that's going to give us about another mud, so that's just even less that we need. And we need less than 1 machine for each step, so let's just make them efficient. And a little bit of water and viscous mud water and whatever, but that's nearby. And then the fertilizer, 1.37 sure sounds like a tiny amount of fertilizer. It's not. We produce 4.5 at maximum, but now this setup isn't really running because it was primarily being used to make gardens from nothing. But now that we have gardens and they're growing themselves, we don't need that fertilizer anymore. So we totally can use it for this new growing process. And we go back to the beginning here, look at the inputs, look at the outputs, and all of that is stuff that we can take care of. So we have a build here. And this is why I wanted to avoid fixing this problem first, because when the dust gets in there, the whole process is going to start up. And the process will need to start before it will start producing crystal dust. So that's why I wanted to wait on that. I don't want to waste all that making crystals and then set this up, and then it will have to wait until the next train before it can start. Well, there's probably not much point in designing this setup here because it's already in place at crystals. And we're going to be upgrading it in place. I think the only thing we really need to worry about is making sure we've got, you know, the basics that are necessary for any kind of build. So make sure you have a healthy number of inserters, pipes, power lines, and of course, the actual machines themselves. Since none of that stuff is being produced on the bus, we just have to handcraft it all. Oh, and here we go. Looks like we got another rare seed type. We got the Zello squash, which means that now the desert gardens are good. But we can come in here and change this recipe to just making plant life. And boom, when it activates, everything runs for a little while. And they all stop. But cool, now we only have one rare seed type left. So we need some Nexaflax. And we could just grab all of them because we're producing it elsewhere in the factory, but it's probably pretty good to have a nice repository somewhere. So there's always some seeds in the event that you run into problems. So let's just leave 5 in there. It doesn't matter for the logic now that the seed generator has been replaced, but still. And also we can kind of clear this out a bit by grabbing that Nexaflax that we can now grow. Probably need to have some setup to get rid of all this extra biological material. Probably just a place to dump them next to a composter or something. So now we kind of have to look at some of these numbers. Because of belt limitations, it's going to be a little problematic. Where we have 3 belts of material. So we should probably do them in groups of 7 with their own belt. Might have to space this stuff down a little bit here. But that's okay, we're going to have to redo some of this anyway. So let's see, let's grab this. Get that out of the way. So they're already kind of set up in groups of 7 here. Let's set these to the correct thing, Nexaflax. And these other numbers are pretty slow. The only thing is the Nexaflax, which is going to require the red belt. We'll just put the seeds and the Nexaflax on the same belt and sort it later. And it needs a different type of mud water. So we'll put 2 in line. That makes heavy. This one makes concentrated. That one makes light. And light mud water is the input. And then we'll drain the system. There we go. That should fill all those up. And then all of this, but it's probably going to just be moved around anyway, but let's pick it all up. Although this setup technically won't work because they're both sharing a red belt. So they can't share an output, but they can share an input to save space. And then this output exists over here. And it needs to be its own separate belt because each one of these needs to be separate. And we need one more line here. Probably like right there. But it'll be simpler without these undergrounds in here. And that'll be our 3 lines of output. We are going to have to change a little bit how this works. The rates are pretty slow. So we could probably have them combine up here somewhere. Let's see, we got a lot going on here. Can probably save a significant amount of space changing the orientation of some of these pipes and just zigzag our way through the roundabout there. Still gonna have saline water here, but let's just pick it all up for now and then find a better place for it once everything is hooked up. Because we kind of need all this space. I'll leave the polluted fish water there for now. I'm sure it's going to be inevitably in the way. But I don't know, hopes and dreams, maybe it won't be. Well, we're going to need to process all of the seeds, which can come up there. And then we need a sorting warehouse here to make it happen. Let's see, this pipe is kind of in the way. Life would be slightly easier if it was moved. Of course, it becomes in the way of this again. But now it can be an underground, so it'll fit. There we go. I think that's going to work a little better. We have our inputs, and then the output on this side will be the dormant Nexaflax seeds. they will always output. But this is a sorting warehouse, so it needs to have some kind of limit on here. Say just Nexaflax is under 1,000. This goes around. And sure, how about like right here? Making the seeds of the dormant ones. Actually, you might want to give it a little more space, because we need to have a composter in here. Let's put it like right there, and it'll just compost whatever. We'll have a chest in here, and then the seed extractor on this side. Something like this. I think we can squish it in here closer now. And then the output will always be seeds. They can come by here and then combine with the mud there. But then we connect that and it should get distributed. And then we need some logic here. Most of this can just run normally, but we want this output inserter here if seeds get too high. And let's just say above 200. So if there's more than 200 seeds, it will eject the extra to get turned into compost, which will then need to be sent on a drone here. Although, I was thinking that we would have to have another system like this for all of the places making compost, which would be kind of annoying. Or, instead of turning it into compost here, we would just send the seeds directly to a central location that handles all of the composting. Ideally, right next to where the farms are, the primary source of compost. So then the control wire would only have to go between like a very short distance here. So it's a little more complicated as far as just having random stuff on the network, but it is simpler when it comes to the control conditions. That seems like a worthy compromise. So we just have the supply depot here with an input, and like everything else, it has to have a writer on here to limit it. So if Nexaflax seeds have to be equal or greater than 400 for it to turn on, just so it's not sending extra drones. And they would come along here. And it looks like we need some undergrounds to make it work. Okay, it's not looking half bad so far. So now we're going to have our output of Nexaflax. And those 3 belts need to go into 9 machines. And they noticed here, we got to remember to do the modules, because that's required. Okay, 3 machines to a belt. So it'll be in a couple sets again. The numbers are quite large. Looks like each machine basically needs 2 belts going into another sorting warehouse. So it'll have an input, and then 2 outputs. 1 inserter goes in, and 2 go out. And this last one basically needs 4 of them, just to try to pack out that belt there. Then we'll have an output of a bunch of stuff. So we need to get this lined up here. Gonna have our output, so the first one will have to be there. So we have to line this up. Let's try to get it just square with everything else. So like right here. And I see now this pipe is in the way, so we'll just pick it up and hope to remember to fix it. But we do have pipe visualizer, which makes it pretty clear that there's pipes that are just dead-ending nowhere, and hopefully that will help us figure out where to put them. Alright, we got 3 identical setups here. Let's just mash them nice and close together, make it as small as possible. And then we need all of these belts to go into a sorting warehouse. Let's have the warehouse down here, since dust needs to go down. It will basically be like this. Although it'll take up probably less space if it's done directly in the middle here. So all that stuff goes in there. And then we will have an output of 23 dust, which will have an output here for the crystal dust, which will go where it needs to go. Then we're going to have 4 red belts of output. So let's try to plan this here. Well, we can do groups of 6. With the pipes in the middle. And each side would basically get its own belt here. So it'd be something like that times 2. Let's just do it in this space over here. I don't really want a crowd next to train tracks, although when you look at this, is a train really gonna ever come through here? Like, no, not really. So in that sense, it's probably fine to just kind of place it here. But I'll put it over here so it's kind of in line with the output of this warehouse. So we'll have our belts, many belts of output, making leaves. And same pipes are kind of in the way. But we'll try to place this out here. And I'm not too worried about covering up the oil sands. And that's slightly too many machines, but it's 100% more square than it would be if it didn't have that many machines, so let's go with that. So these belts can go straight through. These other ones can swing up a little bit and go over there. So yeah, this is more logistically complicated than the other setup, just because the quantities are so much higher. But finally, this will make our output. And the controlling tank is up here. There's no reason for it to be up there. So let's just cut it out and put it in a better spot. Well, the other pipe is right here. Would be nice to try to line up with it. Although having a 4 corners tank would probably be a little nice here, so let's just use that and reprogram it. Because that way the tank could be right in the middle. So we have our inputs here. And they're going to try to fill this up fairly full. We don't want it to fill up all the way, because there needs to be some space for the train to connect. So we have our pulp connection here, but would it line up better right here? Hey, it actually lines up perfectly. If we put it right there. What do you know? That doesn't happen very often. Okay. And then we need to get that same nutrient pulp from the train over here. And now that all these machines are placed, can probably just kind of go right on top of some stuff. And yeah, that when the factory is supplying pulp, that this process won't work. And it will need to use the full factory's output of crystal dust, but it is what it is. And then we'll come in here and have a pump, but we don't want it connected right now because we want to see how this process works, so we want to let it fill up all the way. And it looks like it already basically has the right amount in there, so this probably won't run for very long. And hopefully that gets everything lined up, and it seems like it does, because all these things have their independent lines that they're following. So that looks pretty good. So now we just need to get them hooked up here. The saline needs to take that special pipe. It was kind of a fix. But let's come in there to get that lined up. This should be mostly reconnected. Looking for any lines going somewhere, but not doing anything, but they look pretty good. I think we just had some modules to put in here. Speed modules. for this setup here to make it smaller. And same here. And then efficiency for the other machines, because they were already pretty small as is. I think that's set up pretty well. So we'll need to test it. Let's unhook each individual section to make sure that they work. So we'll unhook that. The crystal dust will just kind of fly out here and stop, and then it will pile up in this warehouse, which is fine, because the limiter is right here. So we don't have to worry about it just going forever, and we'll unhook that. And I think we can let the rest of that run. Binary. It grows or it does not. Nothing in between. But we have our Nexaflax seeds, which the starting point is right here, but I don't want these machines fighting for them, because we need to start generating seeds. So in that sense, probably want to unhook one of these lines and just put all of them in there. Oh yeah, we needed to get the fertilizer in here too. That's actually pretty annoying, because it's going to move all of these machines. Okay, seemed like the easiest solution was just to move these warehouses down a square and insert the fertilizer in the middle. It does misalign some of this stuff, but after placing all of those pipes, I'm not about to just move all this stuff and do it again, because everything looks real nice now. But I think this will work. And then we can just send the fertilizer up here. The fertilizer usage is pretty low. Let's grab a couple of drones just to make sure it's not too slow. So we'll have 5 drones requesting fertilizer here. And the output will go up there. So it seems pretty good. I'm kind of worried that it's going to take a long time for those drones to get here, so let's go grab some fertilizer real quick, just so we can jumpstart this process. Now I get to use this new road, and it makes going down here a lot easier, especially with pavement drive assist, so I don't even have to steer. I guess we can check on the seeds while we're here. Oh, it stopped, because now we have every unique seed type. There it is. Mushredato. Or Mushredtato. Now that we have all those types, we no longer need to generate any seeds, because now we can unify all this stuff and have them all work identically. And we can get rid of the seed belt here, because we don't need it anymore. And we don't need this seed logic either. I'll just leave all these things here. Why not? It's not hurting anything by leaving them there. But otherwise, this is our plant life generating setup. So now it's really quiet. Awesome. That took how many hours? I'm trying to think. Can't remember what the playtime was like. But what, 14 hours? 16 hours? That it took for all that process to run. So I'm glad we did it a couple episodes ago, because that would have been excruciating waiting for that process to occur. But now we can grow anything we want. Looks like there's a missing inserter. There we go. That one is not missing down there. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we're going to see how this farm works out, and then we're going to try to find a way to make more silicon. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.